Hey everyone, welcome to Ask the Pastor series. I'm your host, Pastor James, and this is a podcast where Pastor Jacob will be answering questions that have been given from members of One Family Church. Hi, this is Pastor James, and today we have a special edition of Ask the Pastor. We're going to be actually asking the missionary today, and so I'm interviewing Richard Hibbert, who is the director for the Centre of Cross-Cultural Mission at Sydney Missionary and Bible College right here in Sydney, and we're going to be talking about a book that he and his wife co-authored called Walking Together on the Jesus Road, Discipling in Intercultural Contexts. And I've read the book, and it's a fantastic book to help people, anyone wishing to disciple someone from a culture other than their own. And so I have him with me now. So Richard, hi, how are you?
Hi James, lovely to be here. Thank you for interviewing me.
No, it's a pleasure. And yeah, just to get to know you a little bit, and for people watching, tell me a little bit about your background and how you became a Christian, or how you became a missionary, and even how, I guess, you came to eventually write this book with your wife, co-authored, I believe. We're talking about your book, the book called Walking Together on the Jesus Road, Discipling in Intercultural Contexts. That's the book there. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
It's interesting you should ask me right now. Only a couple of weeks ago, I was rung up by somebody. I didn't know who it was, and they left a voice message, and it turned out to be my neighbour from more than 40 years ago in England, a family next door who were really the only real Christians I was consciously aware of. They invited me along to all kinds of things, and I don't think I came to faith then, but years later at uni, I did. I made a promise to God, said, Lord, if you get me into medicine, I will serve you with my life. And he remembered that promise. Had forgotten all about it.
We always forget, don't we?
And at the end of that year, I did get into medicine, and my first friends were Christians. I couldn't remember this promise, but they started challenging me, and I went along to a Bible study. There was this girl I liked, and that was the reason why I went. And then she stopped going, but I kept going to the Bible study. And you know how you take it in turns to lead the study? Well, I had to as well. I got my Jerusalem Bible from home, and not long before I was asked by one of the fellow members of the group to go out to share the gospel with people at lunchtimes, and I tried with him, and it was through that I realized I had no idea what this good news actually was. So I started reading the booklet, and it was through that really the first time I hit home to me that Jesus had died on the cross for me, for my sins, in my place, and if I put my trust in him, I would live with him forever, and have forgiveness of sins, all those things, and I did, and everything changed. My first experiences after that were really a year after I became a believer. I discovered the Great Commission, which says, go into all nations, make disciples of all nations, and I started to think, okay, it may not be Australia, and I started praying through a book called Operation World, which talks about the prayer needs for different countries, and Turkey was the second country I prayed for, and really struck home to me. Then it said, in 1984 edition, it said, this is the largest unevangelized nation in the world. And I thought, okay, that's a big enough challenge, Lord. I'd like to head in that direction. And it just happened that my wife-to-be was thinking about the Kurdish people, half of whom live in Turkey, and we began to head in that direction.
From reading a book and also listening to your story previously, but I believe that you probably didn't feel, maybe you and Evelyn probably both didn't feel very well prepared, or maybe thought you were prepared, but you probably found that you weren't prepared as much as maybe you feel you should have been. I think it's a common story that happens all across the world when missionaries from, say, Western countries go to countries that are totally different cultures, that have different worldviews. How did you feel that maybe your training or maybe your knowledge, experience was inadequate? I guess that also lead us to why you actually wrote this book.
Sure. We found both in ourselves and for others that we weren't very well prepared for, well, particularly, I think, sharing the gospel and sort of adapting the way we did it, that you do that on the job. But as we began to get into discipling new believers, or those who are starting to walk on the Jesus road, my task, as it were, in Turkey was to follow up people who'd written into the Bible correspondence course for the first time and it was like their first meeting with a Christian. So sharing the gospel with them, whatever way, was fine, and I learned how to adapt that. But then when they wanted to walk on his road, because we weren't quite sure had they crossed that line, that heavenly line of being born again, quite often, how to disciple them. It's a big struggle to know, how do you disciple someone from a completely different religious background and a completely different culture with a different way of thinking. And that was something we kind of had to learn on the job, and wanted to help others with, because a lot of people struggle with that. We tend to come I tend to come with my 10 lessons or 20 lessons or 50 lessons in my curriculum, but it just doesn't work. Right. That's not how people learn in most of the world.
Well, I heard that there was a lady that Evelyn was discipling.
Yeah.
And she did come to faith, and I believe you were saying that, she really became a disciple, a true disciple of Jesus. But there was a very different method, or it was very different to what you were normally used to, or what she was used to. Maybe you can explain that a little bit to give us some insight.
Sure. So the way for her was her daughter, who had never been able to speak until age 9, and some visiting believers from another. This is the beginnings of a people movement all across Bulgaria, where thousands of Muslims are coming to faith in Christ. Place where we were, the region where we were, no believers, starting from scratch. But we had these visitors who had been Christians for a few years from another town, and they said, so sorry, we have to go across the border back to Turkey for a few days, for a couple of weeks. And they said, no problem, we'll take your place. And while they were there, this lady's daughter got prayed for. They prayed for her, and she ran home saying, Mummy, I can speak.
Oh, really? Wow.
So that was her grabbing of her attention, and maybe 90% of those who came to faith in Bulgaria have come to faith from this people group, the Milet, have come through their attention being grabbed through healing, someone in their family or themselves being miraculously healed. But then there's the getting on the Jesus road, actually getting to know him. So she started, her mum started coming to meetings, and I remember meeting after meeting, we'd have these kind of just discussing, talking on the floor, sitting on the floor, and she'd say, I love Jesus' way, but I love Muhammad's way as well. And I want to walk on both roads. And I said, I kept saying John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. And it didn't really get through until one day, this lady had a dream, and in the dream was God and Jesus and Muhammad, and God pointed to Jesus and said, this is the one I want you to follow. Wow. And from that day on, it was no problem. She was totally and utterly committed to following him, and became a really great evangelist. So Evelyn went on to disciple her, and her way of doing it was to spend every Saturday 8 hours with this lady. Yep. And it wasn't just the lessons or the Bible or whatever. Out of those 8 hours, there might have been 2 hours in the Bible. They kind of worked through the Bible cover to cover. But there's lots of other things. Family came in and out. They had to make a meal for others. They'd sometimes show the Jesus film to visitors who came. It was in the lady's home. And lots of life going on, feeding the chickens. I don't know, maybe going to visit from neighbors, and
Sure. Wow, that's a great story, a great testimony. All right, great. And and what other things do you think that this book can help anyone, whether a missionary or a local person or a pastor or evangelist wanting to disciple people of other cultures?
I think that another thing is that we do tend to come with our own curriculum, our different topics. It does tend to be fairly abstract, often, especially from the West. You want to talk about God and Jesus and the church and, baptism or whatever. And it's a whole lot of fairly abstract categories that a lot of the world can't relate to so well. They're much more concrete and relational. They learn through stories and drama and memorization of things and doing and, as you say, imitating. And they have a different set of, not just a different way of thinking and learning, but also a different set of questions and issues and fears and things they're wrestling with than we had growing up as believers. Some of them will overlap, but there are many new areas. And one of them that we concentrate on in one chapter is the unseen forces and powers that new disciples from other cultural backgrounds and religious backgrounds wrestle with. And so it's not, for instance, uncommon for a new believer to be find themselves feeling like they're being strangled in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And it's a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual force or a spirit. And it's holding them back in some, it's putting fear into them. And there are all kinds of other ways in which people are held back in their growing as disciples. And if we make it seem like we just don't want to talk about that area, we say God's sovereign, or just sort of whitewash it and don't want to get in and help them with practical ways, then they look for other answers. And sometimes they look for other answers outside Christ.
Sure. So even someone that is a Christian, and I've had this in our church in Granville, even people people from other cultures who become Christians, but not long in, they do find that struggle of those sort of supernatural demonic forces.
Sure.
And I remember doing some quick research to learn how to pray for or against and these kind of things. And I do feel, as you say, if I wasn't able to help or provide some sort of answer that makes sense to them, and they do feel that and they do feel the power of God over their lives.
Yeah.
In that instance, I do feel that they would have gone somewhere else to find that, and it may not be another church or Christian. It may be back to their old cultural ways. So
that's right. Looking for spiritual power to address whatever is going on negatively. Sure. Some of the things we have to do with them are very practical, like going to their homes and praying through the different rooms and saying, in Jesus' name, go, be gone, and go to wherever you come from, to spirits and forces or any kind of thing that may be holding them back. Very practical things involving the community of believers in helping them you disciple. They often understand the issues that surround these things much better than we as the foreigner do. Different ways that we can help them practically with engaging unseen forces that they
and you also I think you mentioned previously in our discussion that often we go from, say, John or one of the Gospels and then go maybe to the epistles, and then I think after a lot of the New Testament, then we go into the Old Testament, once we feel like we want to learn more. I remember hearing you say that really in the majority world, in a lot of cultures, they would prefer the context of starting at Genesis and reading through the Bible in a sort of more biblical theology or biblical narrative, rather than sort of that systematic theology or starting with just the Gospels first.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. I don't think there's a set pattern or rule you have to follow, but we have seen the usefulness of helping people see from the beginning, because we've got I think Christian background sort of people have a sort of an understanding of some of those stories from somewhere. But when you have nothing, and it's hard to fit Jesus into the promised plan of God. Maybe that's a way of seeing it, but and how he's worked with people through the ages. People from the majority world, they tend to relate to Old Testament stories a lot better than your average person who's grown up in the West do. And it's partly because the sort of basic thinking thought world they live in is a more similar one to that of the...
Right. So the Old Testament really it's kind of more the world that they live in. Yeah. In their life right now. So
that's right.
Definitely worth...
I've heard some of the best sermons on Old Testament passages were newish believers from Bulgaria preaching. I can remember one about Noah and the ark and the emphasis on God shutting the door, and so powerful.
Yeah. Okay. No, fantastic. So I think that's a pretty good sort of summary or a bit of insight into how this walking together on the Jesus road, this book, can actually help. Maybe you can just finish off by saying, who is this for? What sort of people do you think this book would help?
I think it's particularly for anybody discipling from someone from a different cultural background than their own. But I also think that it may help us more and more, even in any cultural context, to get a grip on a more holistic way of discipling that goes beyond just the lessons. It kind of gets us beyond that, takes us beyond that. And if you've already got that, maybe you don't need to read the book, but if you're thinking, I'm struggling doing the discipling I'm doing of this person or group, then I would say give it a try, give it a read and see if there are tools there that may help you.
Sure, thank you so much. Look, it's been great to hear about you and Evelyn and how you came to become Christians and missionaries, and then to write this book. And you have written other books as well. So I know there's a book, is it
Leading Multicultural Teams. Yeah.
Leading Multicultural Teams, and there's other books as well. They're all, I haven't read all of them, but this one I have read, and it's been very helpful. I hope it can help a lot of people. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, James.